Hi, I'm in the book Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. Chapter 25 is an article by Elisabeth Elliot, who was a missionary. And this gives a very good perspective, I think. Her title is The Essence of Femininity, a Personal Perspective. And I think it's a valuable perspective because she is someone who has lived in different cultures, not just one culture. So here are some of her comments. For years, I have watched with growing dismay, even anguish, what has been happening in our society, in our educational system, in our churches, in our homes, and on the deepest level of personality, as a result of a movement called feminism, a movement that gives a great deal of consideration to something called personhood, but very little to womanhood, and hardly a nod to femininity. Words like manhood and masculinity have been expunged from our vocabulary, and we have been told in no uncertain terms that we ought to forget about such things, which amount to nothing more than biology, and concentrate on what it means to be persons. Throughout the millennia of human history, up until the past 2 decades or so, people took for granted that the differences between men and women were so obvious as to need no comment. They accepted the way things were. But our easy assumptions have been assailed and confused, and we have lost our bearings in a fog of rhetoric about something called equality, so that I find myself in the uncomfortable position of having to belabor to educated people what was once perfectly obvious to the simplest peasant. And here I must make a confession. Almost everything that constitutes an issue in modern American life I view from the vantage point of peasants in a Stone Age culture where I once lived. I always ask myself, what would those people make of all of this? Where would I begin to try to explain it to them? This exotic perspective does, in a way, throw a clearer light on the basics that helps me assess the issues. For a number of years, I lived with jungle Indians in South America who expressed their masculinity and femininity in a variety of ways, never pretended that the differences were negligible, and had no word for role. The femininity of the women was a deep-rooted consciousness of what she was made for. It was expressed in everything she did differently from men, from her hairstyle and clothes, if she wore any, to the way she sat and the work she did. Any child knew that women wove hammocks and made pots and caught fish with their hands, cleared underbrush, planted crops, and carried by far the heaviest loads, while men chopped down trees and hunted, caught fish with nets and spears, carried no loads at all, if there was a woman around. Nobody had any complaints. These responsibilities were not up for grabs, not interchangeable, not equal. Nobody thought of power or prestige or competition. Nobody talked about roles. This was the way things were. Once, in the bungling way of foreigners, I brought down the house, as it were, by picking up a man's 8-foot spear and pretending to be about to hurl it. They died laughing. If they had not taken it as a joke, I would have been in serious trouble. Women had nothing to do with spears. Their power did not lie in being equal with men, but in being women. Men were men and women were glad of it. They understood that this was how things were arranged originally, and they liked it that way. That perspective, among other things, convinced me that this civilized business of roles is nearly always, to put it bluntly, a power struggle. Coming back to this country and listening to a good many solemn dialogues on the roles of women in this or that or the other thing, I noticed that this or that or the other thing was never anything to do with fishing or farming or writing a book or giving birth to a baby, but always something that touched in some way on questions of authority or power, or competition, or money, rather than on the vastly prior issue of the meaning of sexuality. In politics, in big business, in higher education, feminism is frequently discussed, but femininity, never. Perhaps it should not surprise us that secular higher education has long since discarded the image of femininity as utterly irrelevant to anything that really matters. But it is calamitous when Christians' higher education follows suit. This is what is happening. It is my observation, and I may add my experience, that Christian higher education trotted happily along in the train of feminist crusaders, is willing and eager to treat the subject of feminism, but gags on the word femininity. Maybe it regards the subject as trivial or unworthy of academic inquiry. Maybe the real reason is that in its basic premise is feminism. Therefore, it simply cannot cope with femininity. Secular philosophy comes at us daily with terrible force, and we need Paul's admonition to the Roman Christians. Don't let the world around you squeeze you into its own mold, but let God remake you so that your whole attitude of mind is changed. Feminist philosophy, which sounds reasonable enough on the surface, is a subtle and pervasive poison, infecting the minds of Christians and non-Christians alike. She asked a very good question here. Why, I asked, does feminist theology start with the answers? One who spoke on a biblical approach to feminism defined her task, a formidable one, I should say, as the attempt to interpret the Bible in a fashion favorable to the cause of equality. This was Virginia Ramey Mollenkott at Evangelical Women's Caucus, Washington, D.C., November 1975. She says, we must and we do deplore stereotypes that caricature the divine distinctions. We deplore the abuses perpetrated by men against women, and let us not forget, by women against men, for all have sinned. But have we forgotten the archetypes? Stereotype is a word generally used disparagingly to denote a fixed or conventional notion or pattern. An archetype is the original pattern or model, embodying the essence of things and reflecting in some way the internal structure of the world. I am not here to defend stereotypes of femininity, but to try to focus on the original pattern. The first woman was made specifically for the first man, a helper, to meet, respond to, surrender to, and complement him. God made her from the man, out of his very bone, and then he brought her to the man. When Adam named Eve, he accepted responsibility to husband her, to provide for her, to cherish her, and to protect her. These two people together represent the image of God. one of them in a special way, the initiator, the other the responder. Neither the one nor the other was adequate alone to bear the divine image. Then she talks about the Virgin Mary. She says the Virgin Mary's, the gospel story begins with the mystery of charity. A young woman is visited by an angel, given a stunning piece of news about becoming the mother of the Son of God. The Virgin Mary's answer holds no hesitation about risks or losses or interruption of her own plans. It is an utter and unconditional self-giving. I am the Lord's servant. May it be to me as you have said. This is what I understand to be the essence of femininity. It means surrender. Think of a bride. She surrenders her independence, her name, her destiny, her will, herself to the bridegroom in marriage. This is a public ceremony before God and witnesses. Then in the marriage chamber, she surrenders her body, her priceless gift of virginity, all that has been hidden. As a mother, she makes a new surrender. It is her life for the life of the child. This is most profoundly what women were made for, married or single. And the special vocation of the Virgin is to surrender herself for the service of her Lord and for the life of the world. The world looks for happiness through self-assertion. The Christian knows that joy is found in self-abandonment. If a man will let himself be lost for my sake, Jesus said, he will find his true self. A Christian woman's true freedom lies on the other side of a very small gate, humble obedience. But that gate leads out into a largeness of life undreamed of by the liberators of the world, to a place where the God-given differentiation between the sexes is not obfuscated, but celebrated, where our inequalities are seen as essential to the image of God, for it is in male and female, in male as male and female as female, not as two identical or interchangeable halves, that the image is manifested. I'm linking to a video David did called Monotony, Drudgery, Leisure, and the Destruction of the Image of God. And he's speaking in reference to Alfred Garvey on saving men and society.